A single mom sheltered 25 freezing bikers. The next morning, 200 Hells Angels surrounded her cabin. Snow fell thick and heavy that night, blanketing the lonely mountain road in silence. The wind howled through the pine trees like a cry of despair, rattling the windows of a small wooden cabin perched at the edge of nowhere. Inside, a single mother sat near a dying fire, her little boy wrapped in an old quilt beside her, both fighting the cold and the ache of isolation. She had no idea that within the next few hours, her act of kindness would bring 200 leather-clad bikers to her doorstep, not for revenge but for something far more powerful. Before we dive into this unforgettable story of compassion and courage, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet power of a good heart. Your support helps spread real stories that remind the world what humanity still means. The woman's name was Claire Turner, 34 years old, a widow who had lost her husband in a tragic construction accident 2 winters ago. Life had not been kind since then. She worked part-time at a roadside diner 30 miles away, barely making enough to keep the lights on. Every evening she'd drive through winding icy roads to get back to her isolated cabin tucked deep in Montana's Bitterroot Mountains. Her 7-year-old son Eli was the only reason she kept pushing forward. That night the temperature had dropped below freezing, and the storm was getting worse by the hour. The power had flickered out hours ago, and the only warmth came from a wood-burning stove she had managed to keep alive with the last few logs. As she stirred a pot of soup, she heard something unexpected. A distant roar like thunder growing louder. Headlights broke through the blizzard, cutting across the white curtain of snow. Claire frowned and peered through the frost-covered window. At first, she thought it was just 1 or 2 travelers who had lost their way. But as the sound grew, she counted more than 20 motorcycles, their engines coughing and struggling in the cold. The riders were drenched, shivering, and half frozen. They were covered in tattoos, leather, and patches that read Hells Angels and Montana Chapter. To anyone else, it might have looked like trouble coming straight out of a nightmare. When they stopped near her cabin, their leader, a tall, broad man with gray in his beard and sorrow in his eyes, knocked on her door. Claire's heart raced. She was alone, with her little boy asleep inside, and 25 bikers outside in a storm. Every instinct told her to lock the door, hide, and pray they would leave. But something inside her, something human and kind, stopped her hand from turning the latch. She saw the frost on their jackets, the trembling hands, the way their breath came out in shivers. They weren't dangerous right now. They were freezing. Without thinking, she opened the door. "Come in," she said quietly. The leader looked at her surprised, as if he hadn't expected anyone to trust them. "Ma'am, we just need a place to wait out the storm. We'll stay out of your way." She nodded. "You'll freeze to death out there. Get in before the wind takes you." One by one, the bikers entered the small cabin, bringing with them the smell of gasoline, wet leather, and cold metal. The room felt crowded, almost suffocating, but also alive with a strange warmth. Claire handed out blankets, set out her small supply of soup, and poured what hot tea she had left into chipped mugs. She apologized for not having much, but they thanked her as if she'd given them gold. As hours passed, the fire glowed brighter and the tension melted away. The bikers told stories, not of crime or chaos, but of loss, loyalty, and brotherhood. One man said he hadn't been home in years because no one waited for him anymore. Another admitted that his mother had died last winter and he never got to say goodbye. Claire listened quietly, her heart softening with each word. She saw them not as dangerous men, but as broken souls, lost in their own storms. The leader, who introduced himself as Reed, stayed quiet most of the night. When Claire handed him a blanket, he simply said, "You remind me of my sister. She died last year. Nobody would help her when her car broke down in a snowstorm." He looked at Claire with a mix of gratitude and pain. "You didn't even know us, but you opened your door. That means something." Claire smiled faintly. "Kindness costs nothing," she replied. By dawn, the storm began to fade. The bikers prepared to leave, insisting on repairing her broken roof and chopping firewood before they went. Reed placed a folded $100 bill on the table, but Claire pushed it back. "I didn't do this for money," she said. Reed nodded, his eyes glistening. "Then you did it for something this world's running short on. Heart." When the engines roared back to life, Claire stood on her porch with Eli in her arms, watching as the long line of motorcycles disappeared into the distance. The snow glittered in the morning light, and for the first time in years she felt that maybe she wasn't alone in the world anymore. But that wasn't the end. The next morning, Claire woke to a sound that made her heart jump, the deep rumble of hundreds of engines. She ran to the window, eyes wide. The road in front of her cabin was filled with 200 Hell's Angels, their bikes gleaming like black steel beasts in the sunlight. She froze, thinking something had gone wrong. Had she offended them? Was this revenge? Then she saw Reed again, standing in front holding a bouquet of winter flowers. His voice boomed over the engines. "Claire Turner, yesterday you opened your home to 25 of my brothers. Today, 200 of us came to thank you." Tears filled her eyes as she stepped onto the porch, speechless. The bikers began, unloading trucks, boxes of food, firewood, clothes, and tools. A group of them started fixing her porch. Another repaired her car, and some even installed a new heating system. The once lonely cabin became a scene of noise, laughter, and life. One biker painted a sign on a plank of wood and nailed it above her door. "The House of Angels." Claire couldn't stop crying. She wasn't used to being the one helped. For years, life had been about survival. One paycheck, one meal, one cold night at a time. But that day, she realized something powerful. Kindness never disappears. It comes back sometimes in the loudest, most unexpected ways. As the sun set over the mountains, Reed walked up to her one last time. "You gave us shelter when no one else would have opened a door. You reminded us that we're still human. We'll never forget that." He handed her a small silver pendant shaped like a wing. "This is our way of saying you're family now." Claire pressed it to her chest, unable to speak. The next time she drove into town, people stared as hundreds of bikers rode in formation behind her truck, escorting her like royalty. For the first time in her life, she felt safe, not because she had walls, but because she had people who cared. The House of Angels became a legend in Montana. Travelers who got stuck in the snow always found help there. And every year, just before Christmas, the Hell's Angels returned, not with thunder, but with gifts for the children of the valley, all because one woman had chosen compassion over fear. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, can ripple through the world in ways you can't imagine.